before time learned to count its years. When the world was still young and the gods listened closely to humankind, there flowed a river born of fire and sky. It cut the land in two, quiet, patient, and eternal. On its eastern bank rose a people who believed the mind was the greatest flame ever gifted to mortals. On its western bank lived those who believed survival was carved by muscle, stone, and steel. Though the river fed them both, their hearts stood divided. The Lumeri tribe built their lives around knowledge. They studied the heavens and read the language of stars. They learned the secrets of soil and seed, of root and remedy. To them, wisdom was worship, and learning was prayer. They were ruled by a queen, crowned not by gold, but by understanding. The only child of a scholar king, she inherited the throne before her shadow had fully grown. Yet she ruled as if guided by unseen hands, calm, deliberate, unyielding to fear. Her hands healed as often as they commanded. Stories of her cures traveled farther than any army, carried by grateful strangers across deserts and seas. To her people, she was the embodiment of fire's gentler face, the warmth that sustains, not the flame that destroys. Across the river stood the Dravakar tribe, whose cities were carved from mountains and whose walls kissed the clouds. They believed strength was truth made visible. Their children trained their bodies as fiercely as others trained their minds. They raised fortresses not only as defenses, but as declarations, "We endure." Their ruler was a king, forged by war and sharpened by strategy. The eldest son of a warrior king, he had never known a world without conflict. Victory had shaped him. Survival had defined him. At his side stood his younger brother, the stone weaver, a prince whose hands spoke the language of mountains. Castles rose at his command, elegant yet immovable, as though the earth itself had agreed to stand with them. Both tribes bent their knees to the sun, believing fire to be the breath of the divine. It warmed their homes, fed their children, and lit their nights. Yet even gods grow silent when pride grows loud. Each people believed the other incomplete. The scholars saw brutes. The warriors saw weakness. And so, beneath the same sun, hatred learned to breathe. The famine came not as a scream, but as a whisper. The rains faltered. Seasons passed uneasily. The river, once wide and generous, began to thin, like a tired vein struggling to carry light. Fields cracked open. Livestock fell. Mothers learned to measure meals in handfuls rather than bowls. Hunger is a patient enemy. It crept into minds, turned neighbors into rivals, and turned fear into accusation. They have angered the gods. They steal from the river. They are the reason we suffer. Then sickness followed. Bodies weakened by hunger could not resist the unseen. Death walked freely through both lands, claiming hundreds each dawn and dusk. Fires burned, not for warmth, but for weeping for the departed. Grief hardened into fury, and fury demanded blood. War erupted like a wildfire starved of rain. It did not arrive all at once. At first, it crept forward in small, brutal steps, raids at dawn, ambushes at dusk, arrows loosed from the fog along the riverbanks. What had once been borders became killing grounds. What had once been paths for trade became routes for marching feet. Then the restraint shattered. The Dravakar war horns echoed from the mountains, their sound rolling across the valley like approaching thunder. Columns of armored soldiers descended toward the river, shields raised, formations tight. Across the water, the Lumeri bells rang, not to signal war, but to warn the people to flee. Arrows screamed across the river in dark waves, blotting out the sun that both tribes worship. Wooden shields splintered under impact. Men fell into the shallows, their armor dragging them beneath the current. The river slowed, not from drought alone, but from bodies. Stone shattered as siege engines struck walls never meant for war. Towers collapsed in clouds of dust. Libraries burned beside granaries. Scrolls that carried centuries of knowledge curled into ash before they could be saved. Fire spread with purpose. Homes that had stood for generations, built by hands now long buried, were reduced to glowing frames of embers. Roofs collapsed inward. Storage pits ignited. Crops that might have sustained the people through famine were trampled under boots or burned where they stood. The night sky glowed orange for days. Smoke swallowed the valley, turning sunrise into shadow and sunset into blood-red haze. The river reflected the sky in crimson, carrying debris, broken weapons, and the remains of both tribes downstream, indistinguishable from one another. The war did not pause for the innocent. Healers were struck down while carrying the wounded. Farmers died defending empty fields. Children hid beneath collapsed walls as the sound of steel echoed above them. The sick, already weakened by famine, perished where they lay, forgotten by both sides. Each tribe blamed the other for every loss. Each loss demanded revenge. And so, the war fed itself. Battles were fought not for victory, but for survival. The Dravakar used discipline and formation, advancing like stone walls that could not be reasoned with. The Lumeri, driven by desperation, fought with tactics born of study and adaptation. Ambushes, poisoned arrows, and terrain turned against the attackers. Neither side gained ground for long. Every step forward was paid for with blood. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The famine deepened, but the fighting did not stop. Soldiers fought on empty stomachs. Armor grew loose on starving bodies. Weapons dulled, repaired, and broken again. The dead were no longer buried. There was no time, no space, no strength left. Names were shouted once, then never spoken again. Victories became meaningless. Losses became numbers. The reasons for war faded, replaced by momentum alone. Until one morning, the fighting simply slowed. Not because peace had been declared, but because there were fewer hands left to lift weapons. The land itself seemed to cry out. Silence followed. No horns. No bells. No screams. Only wind moving through blackened ruins. Only ash settling slowly across the valley like gray snow. The river flowed weakly, clogged and exhausted, carrying the memory of everything it had witnessed. And amid the wreckage stood two figures. The Dravakar king, his armor cracked, standing before ruins he had sworn would never fall. The Lumarai queen, her robe stained with soot and blood, standing before burned homes she had once healed and protected. They did not speak. They did not celebrate. They simply looked upon the hollow victory of mutual ruin and understood, at last, the cost of pride. A truce was called, not by courage, but by exhaustion. On the river's bare banks, where neither side could claim ownership, the queen and the king met, surrounded by their most trusted minds and blades. The queen broke the silence. "This war has no story worth telling," she said. "Only hunger, fear, and graves." The king lowered his gaze. Strength cannot conquer an empty land. For the first time, the river heard truth spoken aloud. The queen offered what her people guarded most, knowledge. Her healers would cross the river freely. Her farmers would plant seeds that survived drought and defied despair. The king answered with action. His soldiers would rebuild what they had destroyed. His architects would raise walls, not for war, but for shelter. Then the young Dravakar prince spoke. "We must think beyond tomorrow. We will build great vaults to guard the harvest, to remember abundance, even in scarcity." A scholar from the queen's court added, "And we will preserve what is stored, so time itself cannot steal it from us." Thus, beneath a wounded sky, an alliance was born, not of trust, but of shared survival. The famine did not release them quickly. 5 years passed. 5 years of rationed grain, rebuilt homes, and tireless hands. Warriors laid down swords to carry stone. Scholars dirtied their robes in fields. Children grew up seeing unity where their parents had seen enemies. Slowly, something ancient awakened. Hope. Then, on a day without warning, the sky darkened. Thunder rolled like the footsteps of forgotten gods. Rain fell, not as a storm, but as a blessing long withheld. The people emerged from their homes, laughing, crying, raising their faces to the heavens as water kissed the dust back into light. The river swelled, singing once more. That night, a great feast was held beside its banks. The king and queen stood together, no longer divided by river or belief. They declared the day sacred, a remembrance of unity over pride. White flowers were cast upon the water, drifting together downstream, carried by a river that had endured as they had. And so the legend was etched into memory that even the river, ever flowing, remembers that strength without wisdom will destroy itself, that wisdom without strength will fail to stand.